for many, many years, being involved in a trust use that opportunity. And this is why I think that also those protests of young people is connected with a feeling that you have a really great opportunity. Last year, I was explaining a few characteristics of your society, but you have to be aware, in accordance with my science, this is psychology, you have approximately 1 million extremely, but extremely intelligent people in this country. 1 million extremely intelligent people can create everything. 1 million people that are engaged in a proper way can create all technological improvements, social developments, all reforms you need in this country. This is a country which has between 180, some they say even 200 million people. This is the biggest potential of Bangladesh. My country is declining in terms of population. We are losing population. You are getting population, even though right now you have a stable demographical processes. But this is incredible potential. In that respect, what you did in terms of democratization of this country, you have to be proud of yourself. In terms of the current characteristics of this country, you have to be proud of yourself. In terms of future potential, you have to be proud of yourself. But you have to be focused on right things, to deliver right decisions, and to cement democracy in the period ahead of us. You have elections that are going to come beginning of next year. I'm sure that those elections are going to be organized in the proper way. Those elections this is very important that this time those elections are going to be organized in a fair way, and that you have a fair results. To trust to democratic process, to build democratic process in this country, and to create more coherent society. This is very important. Opportunity that has the next government in this country is incredible. At the same time, I think that you have to be focused on international group of politicians, scientists, and business people, friends of Bangladesh. This is what you have to do, I think, in the current circumstances, to organize people, to lobby for this country in global arena, to be advocate of this country, and to explain on global forums potential of Bangladesh. This is very important. This is part of international politics of this country, foreign policy of this country. But this is something very important and inevitable regarding potential achievements in the future for Bangladesh, which is not only important for this country, but for the whole region. Next thing I would like to raise as a very important issue with you is a geostrategic location of Bangladesh. You are a country which is covering Bay of Bengal, geostrategic area which is extremely sensitive and very, very important. Potentially you can be member of ASEAN countries. If Bangladesh is going to join, there is going to be almost 1 billion people in ASEAN countries. Huge market, free trade zone, a lot of potential circulation, trading, and communication between scientists, universities, and a well-educated population. At the same time, we have to remind ourselves, you have structural problems within society. Poverty is pretty high. The institutions are not functioning. We have to think about institutions that are crucially important regarding all kinds of reforms and sustainability of reforms that you can implement. You have to think about geostrategical friendship. If ASEAN countries are going to be your partner in the future, this is incredibly important not only in terms of market population, only country that can compete with the United States in terms of taking leading role in a global arena. But India is going to be that partner. In that context, I think, in order to prevent any problems in the future, Bangladesh has to take this into the consideration and to deliver I will try. Okay. But this is the right moment to think in advance. Who is thinking in advance has a future. Who is not thinking in advance is a failing. Western world didn't think in advance, and right now Western world is failing. I'm not very happy because of that. We are living on the crossroad, but we can see, we can witness many strategic changes and the paramount shifts in a global arena all world is facing with. In that context, I have to mention the war in Ukraine. War in Ukraine creates impact in global arena. War in Ukraine is disaster. A lot of people are losing their lives. But even more disaster, I think, is that animosity between Ukrainians and Russians are going to be, unfortunately, inevitable in next decades. I'm coming from the country that has been facing with a civil war. This is Yugoslavia. In Yugoslavia, we've been killing each other for years, and even today, 25 years after what happened, we have a problem when we didn't implement reconciliation process. Without reconciliation process, there is no sustainable peace. If peace agreement is not sustainable, cemented by reconciliation process, we can wake up always in the war again. And this is very fragile moment regarding that area of the world, Russia and Ukraine. Russians and Ukrainians are almost closest people, really brothers, almost same origin. And people that are defined by the almost same characteristics are very often involved in the conflicts, because that difference, small difference between countries and the people is the triggering, sometimes are triggering big conflicts, and this is characterizing human beings and the world nowadays. Not only nowadays, that was characterizing the world from the beginning of our existence on the earth. But I want to underline once again situation in Ukraine. The peace agreement which is offered right now by United States President Donald Trump to Ukrainian leaders is something which can create paramount shift in a global arena, in the international legal system and international rules. Last time I was underlining something that I consider very important. All those processes that are putting in a very dangerous situation our common world started with my country, with the autonomy Kosovo, which was precedent in a global arena, and the attempt of the Western countries to impose the Kosovo independence on the territory of sovereign country like Serbia. Unfortunately, Bangladesh recognized Kosovo independence, was a precedent that triggered a lot of tensions all around the world. But now, just to remind ourselves, after Kosovo, that was Southern Ossetia and Abkhazia in Georgia, and right now Ukraine with the Donbas, Crimea, and other areas and republics not republics, but autonomies within Ukraine. This is Donbas, this is Lugansk and Donetsk, and this is Kherson and Crimea, and this is Zaporozhye. Situation is very dangerous. If that peace agreement is going to cement partition of one country which is member state of United Nations, not new member state of United Nations, just to remind ourselves, Ukraine is, I think, member state of United Nations from 1945. Even though they were member of USSR, they were member of United Nations. If we are going to make a precedent like this, every single country in the world can be faced with such problem. Partition and division within countries depend on the political forces that are going to support partition and dismantling the territorial integrity of every single country, which means we are facing really with the main significant threat. After what happened in Security Council of the United Nations, when some countries like United States, Great Britain, France, has been supporting Kosovo independence, which was totally legal process, I was telling to my Western friends, you are making much more dangerous world from now in comparison with the previous world. And this is a situation we are facing with. We are going to see what is going to be the final outcome of that conflict in Ukraine, but I have to remind yourself that we are facing really with a big challenge in that aspect. I'm going to finish my speech today with the last, but maybe the first and most dangerous challenge for the human beings. This is technological development. Technological development is usually bringing goods for us. Better chances for young generation that understand technological development. This is not only about digitalization, without which we cannot create fast boost and a better living standard in every single country, also in Bangladesh. But this is about synergy of the new technologies. We have a synergy in telecommunication sector, synergy in a satellite industry, in digitalization, and right now we don't have any more cars like it was in the past. The cars right now are kind of telecommunication hub, and you have all kind of technology in one simple car right now. But this is about our own lives, our homes, our mobiles, but at the same time, artificial intelligence. And I'm finishing with a kind of concerns. This is about the last researches in neuroscience. Last researches in neuroscience that were triggered by Professor Weston from United States are telling us that you can manipulate by using technology in the medias with the ordinary people in the way that we cannot have any more really free and direct elections. I started with the requirement to have free elections in Bangladesh, which is very important for democracy and future of this country. But at the same time, I have to appeal on you to take this into the consideration. Human beings are very specific. I mean, something is characterizing them, but you can manipulate with the human beings. You can lie them. One of the panel today was talking about artificial intelligence, trust, love, and lie. You can lie human beings. You can manipulate with the huge numbers of the people, and you can organize elections in a very diabolic way. This is why I'm right now appealing on young people. I see them in this ballroom. Please be very much concerned about that. Be focused on that and think about that. Finally, the last experiments with the neuroscience are telling us that when people are thinking about politics, their brain is functioning like a brain during the dream. This is kind of hypnosis. We are not totally engaged, and we are not totally focused on what we are thinking about. If our brain is functioning like in the dream, we are not delivering the right decisions. And in that respect, I have really, really concerns. I do not want to bring kind of pessimism in this room and this beautiful country which deserves optimism, but as a friend of this country, I have to appeal on you to take even this into the consideration. Thank you for your attention. Right now I have to speak with Mohammed Yunus and to think about with him about this country because he's a good friend of mine for years. Thanks a lot.
Good morning, everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome you all as we begin our first plenary session of today. Our first session is titled Fragility as the New Normal, States in Permanent Emergency. For this session, I would like to invite upon on stage His Excellency the Ambassador of Republic of Kosovo to Bangladesh, Mr. Luzim Plana, Country Economic Advisor UNDP of Bangladesh, Mr. Oasis Pare, Ms. Catherine Cecil, Chief of Party Democracy International, Mr. Ali Riaz, Special Assistant to Chief Advisor Bangladesh, Mr. Clay Westcott, International Advisor, Center for Governance Studies, and the moderator of this session, Mr. Kazi Faisal bin Shiraj, Country Representative, the Asia Foundation.
Shall we start?
We will use also the podium. We will use the podium.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good morning, everyone, and most welcome to this session with some wonderful, esteemed, and very experienced colleagues from across the world. And we are looking forward to a very, very enlightful and meaningful discussion for the next 80 minutes or so. To start with, I think we already had a very delightful discussion at the pre-preparation. We had this preparation from like many of you who went through this dialogues and sessions. You know there's a preparation session, and I thought like it was already so amazing, and I'm very excited that we are going to have you are up for quite a fascinating discussion ahead. And to set the stage and set the tone forward, we are going to talk about how crisis has become a new normality. Actually, I would frame it as a question whether we agree that crisis has become a new normality or not, because we come from various backgrounds, we come from various regions, our nationalities are different, the type of work that we do are different, type of places we have been to are different. So every different role most probably had different level of intensity in terms of crisis uncertainty. I remember my cognitive political period in Bangladesh was in the 90s. So we thought the whole life is going to be like the 90s in Bangladesh. Election on time, political stability and everything. But after 2000, of course, we realized that, and by that time when some of us also started their professional life, we realized that we plan during a relatively stable time. We plan based on the assumption that there's going to be stability. We strategize based on expecting a period of peace, but then we end up in crisis and regularly managing and firefighting. So that's the leadership and philosophical journey that most of us has gone through throughout our life. And this session will particularly be bringing that particular uncertainty aspect, and will again ask the question whether we should take uncertainty as the new normal or not when it comes to leadership, when it comes to politics, when it comes to democracy, when it comes to governance, and how institutional reform and institutionalizing some of this uncertainty can help or may not help reduce. So it's an open-ended session. So to start with, I think I have been requested to read out the session itself, because that itself brought quite a fascinating, healthy friction and debate among ourselves. So let me read that. Crises used to be disruptions in the political rhythm. They now embody the rhythm itself. Economic shocks, food shortages, floods, panic, and urgency are all used by governments to maintain power. None of these crises is permanent. Continuity, preserving institutions increasingly rely on improvisation to thrive. People become accustomed to living in a state of uncertainty, as though it were the new standard for stability. Everywhere power feels erratic, tense, and fleeting. Fragility ceases to be an issue and turns into the system when the exception turns into the rule. So the reason I'm saying that is also a good way to introduce our first speaker, Professor Dr. Ali Riaz, a special assistant to the chief advisor. We already heard some of your statement. It's time for you to reflect a bit more on that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Faisal Bhai. I'm going to use the podium. I will try to be very brief. First of all, thanks to Center for Governance Studies for continuing this conversation despite various kinds of issues. And I'm very thankful to Azil Rahman for inviting me and CGS for giving me the opportunity to speak today. I need to start with a disclaimer. Despite the fact that my involvement with the current government, I do not represent the government. The opinion that I'm going to express today is entirely my personal opinion. The description that has been read and which is in front of you with respect to the fragility of the state and the perpetual emergency that we face, I think this description is highly skewed, because it only focuses on the domestic aspect of it, as if the crisis that we are witnessing, which I'm not disagreeing to, seems to be looked through the prism of the domestic one, as if the states are producing it. Of course, the states are at the forefront of creating this perpetual emergency, because as we see, this perpetual emergency seems to give the power to the government. And hence, not only the government, it's the state apparatuses also, which grabs those power, takes the opportunity to exercise it. So this is enormous aggrandizement of the executive power that we have witnessed, and we are continuing to witnessing it. A turning point could be considered as a COVID-19, when we saw that the governments all around the world have tried to grab as much power for surveillance and control and all sorts of things. So that is quite natural to put the state in front of all this conversation. However, I think the governments producing the instability, or the states are becoming very much repressive and all sorts of surveillance capacity, to continue the crisis so that they can have the power, is only a partial story. The reason I say that it is partial story, because that the states are often itself are vulnerable for the external shocks that we see. What I mean by the external shocks, that if you look at the broader economy part of it, you'd see that the center of gravity has shifted from Atlantic to Pacific. What we have witnessed is the rise of China as well as the other East Asian countries and their expansion into Africa and Latin America and so on and so forth. However, the calculus of this global economy has not changed. So what happened is this, that this global calculus or the global economy's calculus produces a certain structure within which the countries, particularly of the global south, has to reside and operate. And that crisis is external, economic one. To give you one quick example to understand this one, in recent years, what we have witnessed in South Asia, 3 popular uprisings, right? One in Sri Lanka, which was followed by Bangladesh, and then in Nepal. In each instances, if you look very closely, what you would see, that these 3 countries have been an integral part of implementation of neoliberal economies, which has produced the growth. Even in case of Sri Lanka, we saw the growth under Rajapaksa government. But at the same time, in all instances, it has created a huge disparity. And that is what triggered this, if we call it a crisis, that has been triggered by that. So the global economic system and its calculus has produced this situation, which it is, state is a participant of it, but not necessarily in the driver's seat. Hence, this crisis that we are talking about is coming in part from this global involvement of these economies, of these states. Similarly, if we look at the other crisis, climate change, for example, is it produced by the states which are the most vulnerable to it? Absolutely not. Bangladesh is at the forefront of it. Does Bangladesh create so much of it? No, it doesn't. So there are crises, if we call it as a crisis, are emanating from the global system, which makes these states vulnerable and which then being used in part the state and the government for capturing the power. With respect to the domestic element of it, where it converges is this, that this disparity which is created through this enormous economic structural elements that produces the disparity, that produces the discontent, that produces this enormous issues for the state, which state then uses. So I have given 2, and then you can pick up the entire question of how the technology is being used. Not necessarily those which has the technological advances are immune from it, but it makes the more smaller state, more weaker states vulnerable. And then these are used for surveillance. China is a case in point, what we have seen. So technology, climate change, global economic structure, all of them are creating a situation within which the states have to operate, and that crisis or those crises gives this opportunity for the state to take over and exercise more power. How do the states do it? In large measure, if you look at this, if you look at the laws and constitution, for example, the emergency provisions that we see in many countries, as a matter of fact, if you look at the constitutions, 9 out of 10 countries' constitution do have an emergency provision which gives power to the government to exercise it. Over the years, say for example, between 1985 and 2014, 137 countries have witnessed the use of emergency power, which curtailed the freedom of press, which curtailed the freedom of association, and which created a state which has enormous capacity of surveillance. So the state-sanctioned emergency power that we talk about through this legal measure, but it's not limited within the legal measures, not within the Constitution alone. Extra-legal measures, extra-constitutional measures are adopted by state. This is where you can pretty much align them with this, that when we are witnessing this, what is described as a perpetual emergency, that is also at a time when we are witnessing the de-democratization, the democratic backsliding. Meaning that on the one hand, the ruling elites are using these state institutions to have more power, and in doing so, there is a disjuncture between the masses and the elites. That is where the elites are compelled to use, compelled in the sense that that is what they want to do, use the state machineries and state apparatuses. So if we put these three things together, that on the one hand is this global, economic, and beyond, climate change is a case in point, IT is a case in point. That is one source of this perpetual emergency. Second source is this democratic backsliding that we are witnessing, if not before, definitely since 2006 throughout the whole world. And the third thing is this, that the states are creating this disparity which is pushing the people on the street and which is being witnessed, which is being described, which is being seen as a crisis. Hence, my point was this, that just let us not look at simply as if this perpetual emergency is created by the state for the state to exercise power. The description that has been put in front of us, it says government. I just transposed into state, that the governments are using it for their own perpetuation in power. That's one part of the story. So this entire perpetual emergency cannot be seen and cannot be simply described as a state of exception unless we look at the international aspect of it and we look at the convergence of the de-democratization or democratic backslide. So what do we do? I say the first and foremost thing that we need to do as a citizen, wherever we are, is basically vigilance. Because the price of democracy is the eternal vigilance. We need to keep that continuously focused on what the states are doing and what are the rationale and the logic that has been proposed by the state. And we cannot simply consider state as if the state is not part of this global system. So that is where I would stop, and I would suggest that let us look at it, that more power that you grab, which the perpetual emergency presupposes, that what would happen is that continuously we will see the erosion of fundamental rights, we would see the erosion of the engagement of people. That's why, despite all limitations, at this point, vigilance and struggle for democracy, and this disjuncture between the masses and the elites, that needs to be addressed. Those things need to be addressed. I hope we can address those things at some point. Thank you again.
Thank you, Professor Riaz. May I now request Ambassador Lunzim Plana? I think you are going to also talk about the regional aspect and the situational aspect, the uncertainty spillover. We are looking forward to your speech too. Thank you, sir. Sir, sorry, I just realized that we actually don't have 80 minutes. I thought the session was for 80 minutes, it's actually for 60 minutes. So we need to keep it a bit brief.
Thank you so much. Yes, I do. I will take care. Dear Mr. Azilur Rahman, thank you so much for this opportunity to have this floor and then to share. And dear Professor Ali Riaz, thank you also for your insights. And it's very helpful. Ladies and gentlemen, I, as the ambassador of the Republic of Kosovo from the European soil, the southeastern part of Europe, let me share my perspectives. How do we see and the perspective and all of these in terms of fragility as the new normal today and the states in permanent emergency. My insights are more on the foreign policy and this is how Kosovo, how we are dealing nowadays with that. I will give just a short brief about the past and now how it's going. There was a time when crises were understood like temporary interruptions on the daily life and the social life. Today, this rhythm has reversed. Kosovo understands this reality very intimately. That means as a young country that we emerged from the wars and then from the conflicts with determination and hope. We have learned that fragility is not only as an internal challenge. It is nowadays produced, is amplified and exported by external actors seeking to influence the political life of their neighbors. Our experiences shows now that this fragility is rarely accidental. We see that fragility in terms of keeping continuously country under pressure, it's like engineered. The attacks that we had recently in the past years offered us a clear example. This was not a criminal incident, that was an organized attempt to destabilize the country, coordinated by individuals connected to structures outside of our country. This is that approach that tries to keep our country in a permanent state of emergency, unable to fully consolidate its institution and to secure lasting peace. Hybrid threats have become a regular feature of our environment. We also face that, and Kosovo is facing actually also coordinated disinformation, cyber incidents, manipulation of ethnic tensions, and political interference designed to weaken confidence of the central institutions. In our case, also fragility also manifests in the sensitive sector of the communities, especially minority management. Kosovo has built a legal framework that protects all communities, guarantees representation in all institutions, and promotes inclusiveness. Yet, we often encounter attempts from the region to distort these efforts, to portray our country and welcome as discriminatory, while those same critics deny basic rights to minorities within their own borders. In the Balkans, we are to move beyond. If we are not able to move beyond of this instability, we have really to acknowledge the actual and the political realities. Lasting cooperation in the region will remain incomplete until there is no full recognition of our country in that region, and the Kosovo's recognition or the independence by all neighbors. As a young state, we also faces our internal fragilities, like the economic vulnerability, somehow also the youth unemployment. But the challenge is the meeting the expectation of the people. Yet despite these pressures, we continue to reform, we continue to digitalize, to invest in human capital and strengthen rule of law institutions. Looking at the international landscape, it's clear that many countries share similar struggles. Political transitions have become more unpredictable. Trust in democratic processes has weakened many places, so that having this in mind and said, states must invest in transparent governance, regional cooperation based on mutual respect and responsible global engagement. We will, as Kosovo, remain committed to these principles as we seek partnership that somehow brings to the support, the stability, but not to conflict. And the message today is very simple. Fragility becomes a system when crisis turns into routine. And to break this cycle requires political courage, regional collaboration, international solidarity. And so with all of that, Kosovo will stand ready also to work with all the partners and to share the vision of a resilient, stable, and cooperative region. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Next, I think we will hear more about how to build resilience from the ground up. And for that, we have Catherine Cecil with us. And Catherine, stage is yours.
Shuva Shakal and good morning. First, thank you so much to CGS for bringing us together to talk about these important topics. All of these sessions so far, including this one, highlight the need for democratic resilience. These trends can be paralyzing, and it's important to remember that they actually affect people at the community and individual levels. In our governance programs at Democracy International, we have learned that we too need to start at the local level, in addition to paying attention to some of the trends we just heard about from the ambassador. We need to build democratic resilience from the ground up. We have observed that robust civic and political engagement at the local level is the key to democratic resilience. We see three components that are critical to its success: youth engagement, cooperation across different political parties, and combating abuse and harassment in digital spaces. Youth account for about 17% of the population in South Asia and throughout the world, and about a quarter of the population in Bangladesh. Demonstrating the new geometry of power, youth-led protests in Bangladesh and Nepal toppled governments. Youth also have great potential to rebuild communities. They're eager to make a difference and looking for different roles to play. Engaging youth improves representation of this large population and strengthens the leadership skills of the next generation. Young people have delivered impressive results throughout Bangladesh, including improvements in infrastructure, water and sanitation, waste management, and healthcare facilities. In terms of cross-party cooperation, even though we see intra-party violence, political parties are well positioned to contribute to peaceful political engagement and strengthened community bonds. Following the July uprising in Bangladesh in 2024, there were enormous levels of engagement throughout the country, but people were fragmented and security was weak. We used social and behavioral science tools to study our efforts to bring people together. With funds from the UK Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office and support from the Asia Foundation, we conducted a behavioral factor assessment to study individual, social, and structural influences that help or hinder cooperation among political parties. Especially at the local level, party members called for more cross-party dialogue, discussion, consensus building, and social engagement. They repeatedly mentioned our multi-party advocacy forums, which bring diverse party members together to push for community improvements. They said they were motivated to cooperate because they believe that the family is the most important social group and that opposition party members were their brothers and sisters. This is consistent with the most recent World Values Survey. They also cited concern for the national interest and the interest of the common people, their belief in the power of inclusion, collaborative discussion, and consensus, and the importance of cooperation in upholding democracy. Finally, they cited the values of care and prevention of harm, which again is consistent with global findings on core values common to every culture. One multi-party forum in Barguna was particularly effective. In August 2024, violence against Bangladesh's Hindu community surged. More than 1,000 houses, businesses, and temples were attacked across 49 districts. Idols were vandalized at a temple in Barguna's Fuljuri Galachipa area, raising fears before the Durga Puja festival. The multi-party group held a roundtable with police, city officials, and temple committees to call for stronger protection, and local authorities responded immediately. Police deployed extra forces, and the city created a 24-hour rapid response unit. With continuous follow-up by the multi-party group, no attacks were reported in Barguna during the entire Durga Puja festival. The district moved from fear to peace. The key elements for the success of all of these multi-party groups, we've worked with 22 throughout Bangladesh, were the frequency of engagement among the parties and their ability to create positive working relationships with local authorities by stressing their commitment to broader community benefits and shared values. In terms of combating harassment and abuse online, this has already come up here and it will come up in the next panel as well. We are concerned with abuse and harassment targeting women in politics. A recent study showed that 76% of female MPs in the Asia-Pacific region reported online psychological gender violence. Similarly, even though they played leadership roles in the 2024 uprising, women activists in Bangladesh face coordinated smear campaigns. One young candidate in Dhaka reported receiving hundreds of abusive messages within hours of announcing that she would run for office, forcing her to temporarily suspend her online campaign. These incidents not only damage individual reputations, but also discourage women from engaging in public life. Women said that cyberbullying was the main reason they did not run for office in the recent student union elections throughout Bangladesh. Research shows that when women hold positions of power, governments better serve all citizens' needs. So this disturbing trend undermines representation and the quality of democracy. Unfortunately, there's no agreement on one effective solution, but it's clear that we need a multi-pronged approach, including legal measures and media interventions, such as fact-checking and increased accountability, as well as psychosocial support and challenges to harmful gender norms. Together, these interventions can protect women's voices in digital spaces and reinforce democratic resilience. Once again, we see local engagement as a key pathway to building democratic resilience, leveraging the benefits of youth engagement, cross-party cooperation, and efforts to improve the security of online space. Onak Dhanabad, thank you very much.
Excellent. Now we are going to have a bit more of a multilateral view on the topic. So Mr. Awais Pare, please. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum, namaskar, shalom, igunlar, dobre utra, selamat pagi. Has fragility increased, and is it the new normal? This is what we were asked to consider in our deliberations today. My view is that in some areas it has increased, in some areas it has not. And maybe I should have given a disclaimer. I'm an economist, so we tend to always we phrase things typically like that. We say on one hand, this is happening, on the other hand, there's something else is happening. So we never come up with very clear messages. I'm looking at fragility in 3 dimensions. One is economic, of course. This is the area I know more about. If you look at economic fragility, I think it has lessened, but there are some areas in our economies where fragility has increased. If you look globally, GDP has increased since 1960, it has increased 5-fold. Asia, its contribution or its share of in global GDP has tripled. The share is approximately 36%, and it's the fastest growing region in the world, and it's likely that by 2030, Asia will contribute almost half of the global GDP. We have also seen lots of improvements. Extreme poverty has been reduced. It was 36% in 1990. Now it's less than 10%. And we have also seen that recessions that affected economies, crisis, the frequency of crisis has decreased, although it may not seem like that. But if you look, historically, in the last 20, 30 years, the crises that we have experienced, economic crises we have experienced, were not as severe. And most importantly, the response and the rebound has been much quicker. And the good thing is we have the tools, we have the knowledge to address crises. We saw more recently after the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. The response was swift, and many of the economies rebounded very quickly. In addition to that, we have also seen how governments have responded to broadening the social safety net, disaster response. Not all countries are doing it very well, but we see it broadly. Many countries have social protection programs in place, and they can respond to crises. But our economic fragility comes from a rise in income and wealth inequality. And I'll come to that in my concluding remarks. And let me at least underline it here. Solutions like redistribution are not necessarily going to help with that. It's important, but that won't address the rising inequality of income and wealth. Our the second dimension where I'm looking at fragility is planetary fragility. That undeniably has increased. I think the data is there, the science shows it. We are now at the edge of a cliff. We have already hit, according to the latest reports, we have already hit 1.4 degrees centigrade temperature. And I was also recently reading, we may have hit one of the tipping points, which is the mass die-off of coral reefs. Number third is technological fragility. Now, I'm not going to talk about cybersecurity, misinformation, disinformation. I think that indeed has increased. We feel more insecure, although technology has given us lots of benefits, and we can continue to benefit from prudent use of technological advancements, which have undoubtedly increased quite a bit. I think the challenge that we, as a humankind, we haven't faced in the past, and we hear a lot about AI, is it will be a challenge for humans because we were always on top of a pyramid, intellectual pyramid, but that increasingly is being questioned by synthetic intelligence, that I'm not so sure how we will live with that technology, which in some areas might be even far more intelligent than we are. And that relationship between humans and AI, this is going to be a critical area, and that, I believe, increases our fragility. Now, of course, that's related to state. I won't get into the politics. There was a lot of promise in the 1990s that we are seeing the end of history. Our political development seemed to be converging in that direction. We haven't seen that. There have been regressions. But indeed, the governments are being asked to do more. It's not a question of just putting in place regulations, providing defense, security. But increasingly, governments are being asked to become more entrepreneurial. And that's related to my final point, which is about state capability. Now, state capability is a very broad term, but that needs to be enhanced so that governments can respond to all these challenges that they face. And let me add here that governments are also being increasingly scrutinized because of, again, the technology. Information is available here. One of the downsides, I mean, we all are happy that information is flowing, but one of the challenges is that it can lead to short-termism. Governments being scrutinized even more might opt for solutions that provide temporary fixes, that might cater to certain political interests, so that's the challenge. The challenge that we face, I talked about climate, I talked about inequality, require long-term solutions. And one of the solutions, of course, is to look at a new generation of structural transformation. A structural transformation that makes our economies greener. There is indeed going to be a lot of disruption. Technology can no doubt help, and that's the challenge for the governments, and that's where they will be tested. Their entrepreneurial spirit will be tested. And some of the tested strategies that have worked, and I believe will continue to work, is to invest in human development. Human development not as human capital, so that you invest in humans so that they contribute more to the growth. No. You invest more in humans so that they have more choices, their agency is enhanced. And lastly, this is not the time to retreat from multilateralism. Yes, we have seen disruptions, particularly in the form of tariff and trade, but the good news is even now 75% of the trade actually is being carried under WTO rules. Yes, there have been some measures in terms of non-tariff measures have increased, but I think many countries still are following global rules and regulations in terms of how they interact with each other. Let me just stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Mr. Westcott? Mr. Westcott, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much. Is this microphone working? Yes, thank you very much to CGS for asking me here to speak today. We live in an age where crisis is no longer the exception that proves the rule. Crisis is the rule. And I want to spend the next few minutes exploring what this means to how states govern, how power operates, and how we as citizens, scholars, and observers make sense of political life in the 21st century. Now, political theory used to operate on a clear distinction, normal times versus states of emergency. The German philosopher Carl Schmitt famously argued that sovereignty is defined by who decides on the exception. Constitutions were designed for stability, and emergency provisions were meant to be temporary. But something has shifted. Economic shocks don't resolve, they cascade. Climate events don't end, they compound. Pandemics, inflation crises, migration disruptions, they're overlapping, mutually reinforcing, permanent features of governance. And nowhere is this more visible than in Bangladesh, where we are today. Consider what happened here in 2024 alone. In May of 2024, Cyclone Ramal made landfall. Then there were flash floods, riverine floods. Then in August, the worst flooding in eastern Bangladesh in 34 years, affecting about 10% of Bangladesh's population. The government's emergency response infrastructure could never stand down between crises. Disaster relief became not exceptional, but routine. This is what governance looks like when flooding isn't a disruption, but a recurring reality. And then there was a political crisis. Student-led protests leading to the Prime Minister leaving the country. All this while the government was trying to control the flood response and navigating regime change. Civil servants were wondering who they should report to. Police forces were being restructured while managing disaster response. The state apparatus was improvising. Now you put economic crisis on top of that, and there's definitely an international dimension as well. Inflation rose. Bangladesh Dhaka lost value against the dollar. Non-performing loans hit record levels. For a country that imports much of its food and fuel, currency collapse directly translates into cost of living. So here's the key insight. These crises don't resolve sequentially, they compound. Climate crisis plus political crisis plus economic crisis don't add up, they multiply. And the result is a state that remains active, even hyperactive, but loses strategic capacity, always responding, yet finding it difficult to plan, always fighting the last crisis, finding it difficult to prevent the next one. What we see in Bangladesh is happening globally. Governments haven't collapsed under this pressure. Instead, they've adapted. Improvisation has become institutionalized. What were once ad hoc crises become permanent modes of operation. Executive powers expand, legislative processes are bypassed for urgent merit measures that never sunset. And this is happening in the developing world as well. In my own country, President Trump justifies his tariff increases and the detention of immigrants as emergency powers. Second, crisis becomes a governance tool. Perpetual emergency isn't just something states endure, it's something they can use. Urgency justifies centralization. Fear enables control. When everything is urgent, scrutiny becomes a luxury we can't afford. Democratic deliberation feels too slow. Citizens adapt their expectations. People develop crisis competence. the ability to navigate constant uncertainty. We learn to live not just financially paycheck to paycheck, but existentially. We stop planning long term because the ground keeps shifting. In countries like Bangladesh, farmers plant crops knowing they may be destroyed. Families build homes they expect to rebuild. This isn't resilience. This is normalized precarity. The result is a distinctive form of political power, fragile and reactive, but also strangely durable. It's fragile because legitimacy depends on crisis management rather than long-term vision. Leaders are judged by their response to the latest shock, not their ability to prevent future ones. Governments must demonstrate they're addressing floods, food prices, law enforcement simultaneously. It's also durable because it's hard to challenge a government that's always firefighting. Opposition politics struggle when the answer to what would you do differently is complicated by genuine emergencies. Revolutionary change seems impossibly risky when stability is so precarious. So where does this leave us? I don't think we can return to the old normal, the world of stable growth, predictable politics, clear distinctions between crisis and calm. That world, if it ever existed, is gone. But I also think we should accept fragility as inevitable. The fact that governments use crisis to maintain power doesn't mean we can't demand better crisis response, more democratic accountability, more equitable distribution of emergency burdens. The new normal requires new politics, politics that can build resistance without sacrificing rights, that can act urgently without abandoning deliberation, that can acknowledge fragility without surrendering to it. Because when fragility becomes a system, the question isn't whether we live in crisis. The question is who decides how we live through it, who pays the price, and whether we maintain our capacity to imagine something better. Thank you very much.
We will open it up for the audience in a little bit. If I could see how many hands are up so that I can understand how much time we have and we can adjust. Oh, quite a lot of enthusiasm. Just before opening it up, any last one or two key messages from each of the panelists? Dr. Riaz?
The key point that I would like to drive home then is that considering the state's fragility from one-dimensional aspect is going to lead us to a blind alley. That's why it requires a comprehensive understanding that are states fragile? Yes, they are becoming fragile, but are the states getting stronger and more resilient to some extent? Yes, they are. So that is what I want to draw home, is that let us not consider it in a very one-dimensional aspect and see it from only domestic elements of it. Rather, it's better to see it as a comprehensive, as a composite entity. State is no longer just a domestic institution. It is a part of this global economic and political dimension. And again, if you're talking about the state's fragility, we are witnessing the fragility of the international organizations as well. UN is a case in point. So there are these various dimensions needs to be seen as a composite one. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else wants to add? Cool. So we are going to go to the audience now. Please, you are close to the mic. I think there are mics are positioned in places, right? Organizers, I think.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, please.
Thank you very much. It's a very pleasure to ask a question. Can I ask a question, Mr. Ali Riaz? who is my elder brother of Dhaka University in 1970, and I am in 1990. I think a country may be destroyed for various purpose. So only 3 points. Latest IMF and World Bank in Washington, D.C., his CEO always say job creation. Job creation, job creation. So I think Bangladesh capable to afford this job creation, young generation, because Bangladesh private sector is very slow now and it's not increasing. 61% service holder in Bangladesh. Number 2, like Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Maldives, various third world country, corruption is a big problem. The ruling parties and rich people, their sons and daughters, their lifestyle, their fashionable, it hits the poor people, middle class people. Third, corruption, Bangladesh is now a main problem. So I asked the question to Mr. Alirias, this problem, so will this uprising, revolution, reback again and again Bangladesh? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let us take a few more questions and then, please. You need to come close to the mic, I guess.
All right. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Yes. Good afternoon. Thank you very much. I'm Zuraida from Malaysia. I'm an advocate of women empowerment. Okay. So the thing I see here is very important because in Bangladesh itself, 60% of the undergrads are women. Yeah. And by the Grameen Bank model, the advisor, has great faith in women because they are very good pay master, 100%, almost 100%. They pay back their loans. So given that kind of assets that Bangladesh has, so we should capitalize on the women contribution to the economy because it is proven that the Harvard studies and so on, that women contribute about 30% increase in productivity of any organization. So given that, the only way that we can increase the women participation in Bangladesh particularly is to look into the election system where we have to have a policy there should be at least 30% of women participation so they can open doors. Otherwise, political parties are very masculine. They're very masculine and it's not easy for the women to come out in the political structure. I was there and I know. And then this is what we have to go through. So I hope if the change with the election system, more women, young women especially in Bangladesh, can take part in politics and they can contribute to the nation. If the men contribute 100%, the women contribute another 100%, you will have 200% progress and development for the country. Thank you.
Thanks, ma'am. Please, gentlemen.
Hello, I'm Ipan. I'm a student. I have 2 questions. The first one is to Alirias, sir. When a government operates in a constant state of emergency, how do we distinguish between the genuine crisis management and the deliberate use of permanent urgency? Is it possible that it's a political strategy to avoid the accountability? The question is to Alirias, sir. And the rest is to all the panelists, whoever would like to answer. That is, when fragility becomes a default condition of a state, how do people retrust again the institutions? Does it require a structural change or a cultural change? Thank you.
Excellent questions. Thank you. Gentlemen over there.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Navid from Department of Economics, University of Dhaka. So I am more interested in economic sector. So I have 2 questions. One is for Mr. Alirias, sir, and other one is open for all the panelists. So the first question is to Mr. Alirias, sir, as you were a member of Constitutional Reform Committee. So do you believe Bangladesh has the institutional tools to stop emergency-style government to be normalized again? And if you do not believe, then what checks and balances are most urgent, and have you proposed them in the constitutional reforms? And the other question is to all the panelists, that is, given the interdependencies among Bay of Bengal economies, what do you think, how can Bangladesh collaborate on macroeconomic policy collaboration such as balance of payment, trade, to reduce the systematic shocks arising from fragility? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please, ma'am.
Thank you. My name is Mohsina Mustafa Miti, and I'm currently working as a research associate at the Bangladesh Institute of Peace and Security Studies, BIPS. And my question is for Ali Riyaz, sir. So, sir, during this whole ruling period of the interim government, we have seen that our police and our intelligence agencies couldn't play a much significant role in terms of maintaining order. Even Bangladesh Army had to step in at times. So, my question is, sir, how would you like to assess the preparedness of the security forces of our country currently to tackle the potential unrest during the time of election? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. And I guess that's the last question.
Hello. It's okay, it's okay.
This gentleman first.
My name is Minhajul Islam and I'm an independent researcher. My question to Professor Riyaz, as a political theorist, in my observation, since the Arab Spring to present, the series of massive uprisings that took place across the Middle Eastern and South Asian countries. In my view, all these uprisings has three common characteristics other than else. That is the democratic aspiration, anti-corruption rage, and distrusting the formal political system. The series of these movements is still continuing. In this circumstance, my question is, how do we proceed and manage the stability within the existing political system that has already been questioned and rejected to some extent? Or do we feel the necessity to redefine, reset, and recoin the very idea of politics, political parties, and political dynamics? And I have another question to Mr. Scott. The hyperactivity of state in the name of security and mitigating the crisis. How do we bring in the democratic stability in the conventional governance system? How do we manage the clarity of legitimacy while the very essence and source of legitimacy itself have shifted? Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you. Last question, please.
Thank you so much. I'm Rizvi Nawaz. I'm a TV journalist working in Channel I. My question to Professor Ali Riyaz. We are talking about the new normalcy of state fragility. What is the status of Bangladesh right now? Fragility to fragmentation or rebuilding and resurrection? Main political parties, including BNP, is blaming EU for this fragmentation. Mistrust among the parties regarding reform and election. Even one of the champion of reform agenda, Mr. Devopriyo Bhattacharya, yesterday, standing on the same dais, he told that reform agenda now is like mission impossible. Why you are under so much blame? Even there is criticism of wasting public money in consensus commission. Thank you, sir. If possible, please answer in Bangla for better understanding for the audience. Thank you, sir.
We are on the clock, but given your, yeah, please, go ahead.
Thank you so much, the moderator, for giving me the floor. This is Dr. Razia from BISS. It's a government think tank under Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I mean, having heard since morning and seen you that it was a brilliant discussion among the panelists. Yes, it's true, having seen the theme of the topic, we are very much fragile, not in terms of within the country itself and beyond that. Fragile also is a very much, I think, predicament for taking a, concerted effort. So it feels to me that we are, live in a country with realism where might is right, and the small countries are facing, a lot of barriers in terms of every aspect. Yesterday, I heard one of the statement from Nepalese ambassador who said that it is not important that, what is said, it is more than important who is saying. So apart from this, my specific question, to the one of the panelists, Stephen, that you mentioned that state credibility, state power, these sort of things are very important. You know that for the last more than 1 year, we have gone through an unprecedented situation, and we are expecting a lot. But if you, if we want to increase the state capacity or state credibility, to what extent we need to go far in terms of education, media literacy, technological advancement, because since in the morning we have heard that it is, we live in the technological age. Proper utilization of the digital technology or public diplomacy is very important. So from Bangladesh context, I'd like to know from you that how we can increase our state credibility or state capacity in these changing circumstances to compete with the other states. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Please, you don't need to go through all the specific questions. If it can be done in general answer. Dr. Ali Riaz, I think you you had most of the questions. Please go ahead. And some of the questions are also answers, by the way. So please.
Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. I would start with that question who requested to speak me in Bangla. Usually, I don't respond to personal questions because this is not the platform to speak on my personal issues. However, since you have asked, I'm going to respond, and I would respond in Bangla. প্রথম কথা হচ্ছে আর্থিক দুর্নীতির প্রশ্নটা আপনি তুলেছেন তথ্যগতভাবে ভুল। জাতীয় ঐকমত্য কমিশনের বিরুদ্ধে কোনো আর্থিক দুর্নীতির অভিযোগ নেই। কোনো বিশেষ ব্যক্তি বা প্রতিষ্ঠান যদি কোনো মিথ্যাচার করে থাকে তার দায়িত্ব তাকেই নিতে হবে। জাতীয় ঐকমত্য কমিশনের পক্ষ থেকে সুস্পষ্টভাবে টাকার হিসাব দেওয়া হয়েছে। সরকারের বরাদ্দকৃত 7 কোটি টাকার মধ্যে 2 কোটি টাকারও কম খরচ করা হয়েছে এবং কিভাবে খরচ করা হয়েছে সেটা চিফ অ্যাডভাইজার্সের অফিস থেকে এবং কমিশনের পক্ষ থেকে বলা হয়েছে। ফলে আপনি যে মিথ্যাচারটা রিপিট করেছেন সেটার জন্য আপনাকে আমি আরেকবার শুধু স্মরণ করিয়ে দেব যে কোনো তথ্যের সর্বশেষ ভাষ্যটি লক্ষ্য করা খুব জরুরি। কেননা যে ব্যক্তি বা প্রতিষ্ঠান বা সংগঠন যারা এই প্রশ্ন তুলেছিলেন তারা কিন্তু এই হিসাবের পরে আর কোনো কথা বলেননি। দ্বিতীয় যে প্রশ্নটা খানিকটা ব্যক্তিগত, তবু আমি ওই একই প্রশ্নকর্তার সেটা হচ্ছে যে আমার বিরুদ্ধে অভিযোগ কেন দেশটার খানিকটা হলেও কথাবার্তা বলার চর্চার একটা সুযোগ তৈরি হয়েছে। যে কোনো রকম কাজ করলে তাতে সমালোচিত হওয়াটাই স্বাভাবিক। 30টির বেশি রাজনৈতিক দলের মধ্যে আলাপ আলোচনার মধ্য দিয়ে জাতীয় ঐকমত্য কমিশন একটি জাতীয় সনদ তৈরি করতে পেরেছে এবং সেগুলো বাস্তবায়নের জন্য সরকারের পক্ষ থেকে পদক্ষেপ গ্রহণ করা হয়েছে। আমরা আশা করছি, আমি ব্যক্তিগতভাবে আশা করি যে জনগণের সমর্থনে ভবিষ্যতে বাংলাদেশে বিভিন্নভাবে কাঠামোগত এবং সাংবিধানিক সংস্কার সম্ভব হবে। ফলে যদি কেউ মনে করেন যে সংস্কারের প্রশ্নটি ইতিমধ্যেই মারা গেছে এবং তারা অবিচুরি লিখতে চান, তারা লিখতে পারেন, কারণ অবিচুরি লেখার অভ্যাস তাদের আছে এবং অন্যরা অবিচুরি লিখতে পারেন। কিন্তু আমি মনে করি যে বাংলাদেশের একটা ঐতিহাসিক সুযোগ তৈরি হয়েছে এবং সেটা অব্যাহত থাকবে। আমি জাতীয় ঐকমত্য কমিশনের পক্ষ থেকে যখন জুলাই জাতীয় সনদ স্বাক্ষরিত হয় সেই অনুষ্ঠানে সুস্পষ্টভাবে বলেছিলাম যে একটি দলিল দিয়ে আসলে সমস্ত রকম সংস্কার সম্ভব নয়, এটি সূচনা মাত্র। এবং জাতীয় সনদের যে শিরোনাম করা হয়েছে সেটা হচ্ছে ভবিষ্যতের পথরেখা। আশা করি সেটা আপনাদের সকলেরই নজরে থাকবে। ফ্র্যাজিলিটির থেকে ফ্র্যাগমেন্টেশনে যাবে কিনা এখন আমি একটু ইংরেজিতে সুইচ করি, যেহেতু অন্যরা প্রশ্নটা তুলেছেন, উনিও তুলেছেন। Whether a state and state of politics would move from fragility to fragmentation depends on several factors. First of all are the role of the actors themselves. Because I believe in the agency that nothing in history is destiny. History is made by the people and the actors. Hence, whether the state, as we experience now with respect to Bangladesh, would move forward and have a further consolidation or fragmentation depends on the actors. But actors alone would not determine. It depends on a combination of other circumstances. And in this regard, I am more inclined to suggest that actors have a better role. And as an individual, as a citizen of Bangladesh, you have the power to actually steer that. And I hope that would be steers towards more consolidation. But states consolidation does not necessarily mean that a strong state which would be more repressive. That is what we are witnessing over the last 2 decades, or perhaps more than that. In many cases, the states are becoming apparently, fragile, but they are getting more and more power, which I described as an executive aggrandizement, having the executive power, and the disjuncture between the people and the ruling elites. So hope that is something that we can determine and moving forward. Someone referred to the popular uprising since the Arab Spring, and hence the expectation, whether we should redefine the politics. I cannot agree with you more. It is time to redefine the politics. And it is not only the popular uprising that we have seen. It is also, if you look at the transition, if you look at the transformation of the politics globally, that you'd see that politics as we used to think is now changing. However, there are status quoists, they will fight back, and institutions would fight back, and that is what is happening. What we are witnessing is this clash between these two understandings of politics. Politics in the sense that traditionally we thought, but it is changing, and in the coming years, if not months, definitely in the decades we would see that one. In maintaining order, whether security apparatuses in Bangladesh are ready, this is a question that requires further elaboration, but I would just simply say that maintaining order itself needs to be defined. Maintaining order might be necessary, but that does not necessarily mean that we should be depending on the security apparatuses for maintaining the order. Until and unless there is a popular participation, it would be impossible for any forces, police, military, or anything that would be able to maintain order. Particularly in circumstances that we are going through, that is the transitional phase. Police has been, in the last 16 years, what we have seen has been so politicized, and now it is so weak. And in some cases, they are also continuing the practices that they had. Those things need to be changed. But let us not depend on the security apparatuses. There is a danger to it, and I hope would be aware of it. Final point with respect to the institutional mechanism of perpetual emergency. There has been some progress on this. Constitutional Reform Commission made some recommendation, and all political parties, irrespective of their ideological orientation, have made some changes in the proposed changes in the Constitution regarding the emergency provision. Previously, the way it has been used for political purposes, we expect that with the changes, it would be possible to make at least limit this. This is not going to go away, unfortunately. Also, with respect to the declaration of emergency in Bangladesh, what we saw, it became completely on the ruling party. What has been agreed upon is that the opposition leader would be involved in the conversation in making the decision regarding the emergency. We hope that would put some roadblocks into the abuse of the power. I wish this emergency provision had not been included, but as I mentioned, throughout the whole world, almost 9 out of 10 constitutions have emergency provisions in some form, and there has been abuse, and we hope that abuse would be restrained, some constraint would be established on if these changes are adopted in the Constitution. Thank you, and sorry for taking more time, I understand.
Oh, no worries. I think we of course ran out of time, and if you still need to have answers to your question, you can always reach out to the panelists after the session. But we really need to stop right now because there's another exciting panel coming up next. So thank you so much for everyone for your contribution, and thank you the audience for your patience. And it has been very, very meaningful 1 hour at least. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, speakers. I would like to now invite them for a group photo session, please.
Good afternoon, everyone, and I welcome you to the session titled The Disinformation Republic, How Lies Become Government Tools. And the session speakers are Alvaro Beltran Uturia, Digital Democracy Analyst, UNDP, Regional Bureau of Latin America and the Caribbean; Andres del Castillo, Chief Technical Advisor, Electoral Support Program, UNDP Bangladesh; Mr. Jonal Abidin Rashid, former Senior Minister for State for Foreign Affairs, Singapore; Mong Min Tho Wang, Accountability and Innovation Manager, Global Network Initiative; Mr. Nurul Kobir, Editor, New Age. And this session will be moderated by Anastasia S. Wiwaba, Project Director, European Partnership for Democracy, Belgium. Thank you.
Good. Test. Test. Not working. Test. 1, 2, 3. Test. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a privilege to welcome you to these conversations about the Disinformation Republic. And I'm honored to be moderating these distinguished panels today. Because across the continents, the clarity on what we think as a truth is steadily eroding. Rumors becoming facts, institutions not only judged by the performance, but also by perceptions, images becoming realities. So lies that we are seeing is a carefully engineered and algorithm is basically behave like a governance tool. In Asia and in the Bay of Bengal regions, we are watching these transformations unfold in real time. Fact-checking report unprecedented spikes in falsehood. In Bangladesh alone, more than 800 claims appeared in the first 3 months of 2025. So disinformation isn't just about corrupting elections, it's reshaping how people trust, how people participate, and how institutions governs. But the sessions today, we will not discuss or point fingers who's to blame. Our aim is to understand the systems, how the false narrative rewired the democratic behavior, and then we also want to explore and identify how accountability breaks down. And most importantly, we will explore what actually worked. So we are joining with 5 different panels that we will start with the first round of questions regarding what has changed. And maybe we can start with Alvaro. Alvaro, you argue that this information today is rooted in the political economic of incentive and accountabilities. What is the single biggest structural shift in the disinformation landscape in the past decades?
Sure. Thank you, Nas, and thank you to everyone for joining us in this conversation. I think when we talk about disinformation in governance, we could spend hours just deciding when exactly major shifts have happened in our information ecosystems. But I think, again, when it comes to the challenges for this specific governance, I want to highlight 2 specific dynamics that I think are different in the past couple of years from even the scenario 5 or 10 years ago. The first one is the pace of change. When we talk about digital technologies and we talk about adoption and who's using what and in what measure, not just people but also institutions and complex systems are integrating new technologies into their everyday dynamics, I see a huge gap between not just the capacity of the institution to guide the use of technology towards specific dynamics or parameters and boundaries that are rights-based and focused on citizens, but also the need of these institutions to function faster and a pressure to adapt or be basically erased from the scenario. So, for example, there's a recent study by UNESCO in which they interview judiciary agents from 97 countries, and the report highlights that around 44% of judges are using AI in their everyday operations, but only 7% of those judges have received a specific training on how to use AI within the parameters that are rights-based and that are focused on the specific mission of their institutions. So again, we're seeing a scenario in which the pace of technology usually tended to take, at least a couple of years for something to be introduced into the everyday operations of a complex system, and that's no longer the case. People are looking for the solutions, people are trying to approach them in the best way that they can, and they're making a lot of mistakes while they're at it. At the same time, they don't have the capacity to govern in an anticipatory manner. They're trying to govern on a reactive scenario to basically mistakes that are being identified as they go. So that's a first big change in the way that governance is shifting in this specific sector. A second dynamic that I want to highlight is inequality. Inequality not just in access, which is the way that we will typically discuss technology adoption and technology access, but also inequality in the way that these platforms and these systems can be governed, not just in the actors that are involved in that process, but also in the countries that have specific voices over others in that specific context. So this is a shift in dynamic that gets even more complex when we think about the relations and the evolving dynamics between public and private, and of course civil society. And I think that gap keeps on getting more complex. I'm going to leave it there for this starting question.
Thank you, Alvaro. Andres, building on that systematic view, how do you observe electoral disinformation strategies change from originally only rumor-based, now even organized in the digital campaign? How do you see that, the changes?
Thank you very much, Anna. Well, first of all, I want to start my participation today, first of all, to thanking to the organizers, to the Bay of Bengal, for inviting us to be today in this forum. But also, I want to start to mention, we are hearing the world misinformation nowadays is coming on and on in the press, everywhere. However, we should to stop and think about this. Information is nothing new. If we go to the 16th century, to this 18th century, 17th century, when the Europeans start traveling around the world and they were doing the first maps, and they were putting in the maps empty area. They're putting areas. This is unknown area. They were spreading news. The people are willing us to come and to conquer them, to teach them. This was something that it was coming in press, in the press of those years, in the old maps. We can see in the old maps all this kind of information was coming. That was the kind of misinformation that was spread during the previous centuries. So it was in the books that were printed there, in the information that it was passed by the church, by the missionaries, telling them, the people want us to go there. But really the Aztecs, the Incas, the Mayans, they were willing, in Africa, in Asia, we were really wanted to have those people to come, but there was a misinformation campaign that was circulating around the world those years. So this has been evolved along the time, along the years. And what is happening now is that it's reaching to a key areas, political areas. As I'm referring to the past, I'm referring to the recent times. So I have the opportunity to be working in the election field for many years. My first election that I worked in 1999 was the popular consultation for the independence of Timor. There were not internet. Then the information was based on rumors. The rumors were spreading voice to voice. And it's not long time ago, it's quite recently. So the rumors were spread, violence is coming, if you vote this way, if you do that, those kind of tendencies and ecosystems that were already built long time ago and still evolving. Going back to your question, Anna, the area of elections has proved to be one of the most stronger area to be suffer from misinformation. There was one famous case, and I recommend you, all of you who has not seen, the famous elections in Trinidad and Tobago, in which there was an Indian minority living in Tobago, and big Afro-American community. There started spreading the news that the elections is not important among the Afro-Americans. Then this was spread, and then the winners there were the minority, the Indian minority in Trinidad. It's a very important case. So elections, it's an area where misinformation can be attacked for all kind of sides, by the political parties, by the authorities, by other countries, neighboring countries, in the different steps of the process. So it's something that is very vulnerable to be. So I'm stopping here, Anna.
Yes, thank you. And Min, From the platform governance perspective, what has fundamentally changed in how tech companies and governance respond to these informations?
Yeah, thank you very much for your question, and also appreciate the opportunity to be involved here. So I'm from the Global Network Initiative, and we are a multi-stakeholder initiative helping technology companies respond to government interventions that impact freedom of expression and privacy rights. So my answers will be framed very much from that perspective. As the other panelists have kindly pointed out, misinformation, disinformation is actually not new, right? But what is new are three things. The first is the challenge of accessibility, speed, and scale. The second is the challenge of what I would call definitions. And the third is around independence. So talking briefly about the challenges of accessibility, speed, and scale, I'll keep it quick. So what's different today is that the misinformation, disinformation, including in relation to elections, can be spread by anybody that has a very basic technical skills at a speed and a scale that it has not been possible before. Right? So that's one quite significant change. The second is around the change of definitions, right? So I guess talking more broadly about the legal and regulatory context, you have laws in various countries that define actions that companies need to take in relation to fake news, misinformation, disinformation, hate speech, or even national security sometimes, right? But who is actually defining what these vague topics are? What falls within the net of misinformation, right? So, not pointing fingers, but I think there's been a lot in the recent media about these sorts of issues as well, all over the world. The third is around independence, right? So when you have the situation where information can spread quickly, easily, and governments, companies are not doing enough to define what misinformation and disinformation are, and also to act against it, you also need this independent parties to fact check what is the ground truth, as it were, right? And here, we also see around the world, specific governments, even in the Bay of Bengal area, funding fact checkers, right? Or in the case of the EU certifying fact checkers, right? So then that leads to questions around, again, what is truth, right, online? So that clearly highlights the importance of media literacy and critical thinking, not only in the countries around the Bay of Bengal, but also more globally. I'll just share some thoughts very briefly around the kind of trends that we're seeing that impact electoral integrity, both actions taken by governments as well as companies needing to respond to these actions as well. And they are broadly four, I'll keep it at four categories, right? So the first is around the concept of intermediary liability. So sorry if I'm getting a bit technical here, but I'll keep it simple. So who is responsible for what content is on a platform, right? Is it the company? Is it the platform itself? Is it the user? So historically, what's been the case is that there's been something called a safe harbor provision, whereby as long as companies act on information that's on illegal information that's on the platform within a specific time period, then they are not responsible for that platform, for that information, for that content, right? So we're seeing a trend where from that kind of safe harbor provision to automated and mandatory content filtering, right, in many jurisdictions. And that obviously creates concerns around how companies respond to that. The second is, and this is an interesting one, extrajudicial mechanisms for information control, right? So in the old days, yeah, not that old, but nonetheless, in the past, right? You have situations where governments ask for specific pieces of information to be taken down for whatever reason, right? We have moved, broadly speaking, from that kind of system to where governments are actually legislating companies to take action almost automatically, not necessarily through content filtering, but actually getting companies to include within their community guidelines or terms of service content that is automatically deemed or at least flagged to be taken down. So, right? So that's another concern. We also see age verification as a way, mandatory age verification, as a way of controlling what youth see in terms of information. And that obviously has, concerns from a privacy perspective, whether it's, opening the door to potential surveillance. And last but not least, and maybe I'll touch on this in a future answer, governments are increasingly seeking to control AI, whether it's through soft law, whether it's through hard law, whether it's through investments in AI and sovereign AI, whether it's through, using AI themselves, which actually then impacts how AI is developed. We see very sophisticated, increasingly sophisticated ways of, controlling, shall we say, this increasingly sophisticated technology as well. I will leave it there.
Thank you, Min. Mr. Zainul, you have seen governance and diplomacy over decades. And this is also changed because of the disinformation and AI. So in your opinion, how has the state's perceptions about information threats has changed, especially in the era of disinformation?
Thank you, Anna. I'm happy to be here because I find this presence really a learning exercise. I've learned so much. And this is my concern too, in terms of facing the challenges of information, disinformation, the technology that goes with it. How do they actually present to the older generation? I think I must be the oldest on the panel here. I wonder myself why I should be on the panel. I should be sitting there learning from them. But one of the concerns I have is actually this question of intergenerational gap, intergenerational understanding, what this is all about. For my generation, I remember when I first was invited by Colonel Gaddafi of Libya to attend a conference, it was basic interaction, human interaction, no technology, no AI, nothing. But it's that kind of interaction that builds relationships, builds trust, which I think was fundamental to whatever the challenge we face. So as we look at this new challenge of AI, in here we call it AI is like I, right? And when it's I is I, you agree with it. But when you are caught in that transgenerational gap and you find yourself lagging behind, you no longer think of it as AI, importance of AI and I, but it becomes bye-bye. And that's the kind of serious challenge which we have as far as intergenerational consideration is concerned. But I'm glad that there are enough among the young who believes in having this kind of conferences, organizations that believe there's a need for this conference, this kind of conference where we can have better sharing, and this is the value of this conference and the value of having us a better understanding what the challenges are, intergenerational, or even among the young, because their needs may differ. And the needs are changing very, very fast indeed. So if before it was information affect the locals' challenges, but now it's about national security, about social cohesion, and also about diplomacy. AI and related potential that come with AI will have a clear impact on those areas of security, social, national cohesion, and also international relations. This is where foreign ministries, governments can no longer take it as a kind of a slow pace of them getting used to these new needs, but in fact have been totally involved, totally engaged, and totally moving on to make sure that the intergenerational challenges will not remain, but will in fact will be enhanced in terms of that better understanding of the needs for today, in fact, today for tomorrow.
Thank you. Thank you. And Mr. Nurul, as a newspaper editor, how have you seen misinformations and distrust reshape the role of journalism?
Well, thank you. Good afternoon to everybody. I liked my colleagues' starting point as the history of disinformation and misinformation is not new. Well, for a journalist, misinformation, or anybody for that matter, misinformation can be produced out of innocent mistakes. When you talk about disinformation, this is a deliberately manufactured so-called information, which has always some political or social negative purposes. So history has dealt with disinformation from, it's not new. Say, there are some grand political and philosophical disinformation that we see in the 17th century, for example, 18th century, when David Hume, on his very influential treatise on human nature, claims that Africans, the black people, are inferior to the white people by nature. That's a huge disinformation by a grand philosopher that influenced this history of our civilizations for more than 200 years. Fact remains, the information remains, that Africa is the cradle of human civilization. And the European propaganda was that they are naturally inferior to the whites. Then again, when an influential philosopher like Hegel writes that Africa doesn't have an history because they have been in the mantle of darkness, and darkness cannot have history, and they have to be civilized only by encountering Europe through the enslavement process. That's a huge disinformation of serious inhuman implications. From that, if I come to the present scenario, even in Bangladesh, say a few months ago, Bangladesh witnessed a marvelous, magnificent people's uprising against an autocratic government that ruled illegitimately for more than a decade. Now, during these democracy protests, so more than 1,000 were killed. Of them, so 130 were children. More than 20,000 were injured. Of them, several hundred have just lost their eyesight. And those who were defeated by this magnificent people's uprising fled the country. They are now propagating across the world in the name of so-called information that who killed them, who killed these democracy protesters. Their narrative is the democracy protesters killed their colleagues themselves. And we know by following the reactions to the Facebook postings or other media campaigns, many people across the world, particularly who are acquainted with their past history, some of them started believing that that must be a conspiracy, that history is never changed. No big changes takes place in any part of the world just by conspiracy. It is the people that changes history remains the fact. But side by side, there are propaganda, and some people swallow them. And that has some serious implications on the development of history as well, that it was a conspiracy to change this. Then again, we have an elections ahead, so political parties have started campaigning. In the process of campaigning, I noticed the other day as a journalist that a political party that actively opposed Bangladesh's liberation war 54 years ago and actively participated in one of the worst genocide that took place in this part of the world. They are now claiming, one of their leaders said, we took part in the liberation war, not for this or not for that, for this and for that. You see the twist of history, a twist of information. It's true that they took part in the war, but important is which side they took. So when you say in a vague manner, we also took part in the liberation war. Yes, they took part. So these are the disinformation that seriously affects the society. Or for that matter, when the Western media, even the so-called professional media writes or say, paints Israeli aggression on Palestine as war between Palestine and Israel. It's not a war. That's a clear case of aggression. So this is a clear case of disinformation of at the grand level. Now, every ages has fought against this disinformation, and the generation that we belong to and the generation that coming in, they will also be fighting against these tendencies. I have reason to believe that eventually truth will find its way, but things have really been complicated. People have to spend, or I should say, waste their time to correcting disinformation. And that's a real waste of life, I must say. For us, the professional journalists, I would finish by telling you a small story. A few months ago, a very young group of people, very serious and good boys and girls came to me. They have formed a company called Fact-Checking Company. And they believe that newspapers, professional newspapers, need to have some professional groups of fact-checkers attached to the newspapers. I was a little surprised as a professional journalist. I said, why? Why I should need a group of fact-checkers within the newspaper? Because every reporter is a fact-checker himself or herself. Why should we publish things without checking it? So if the professional journalists themselves are professional fact-checkers, we don't need them. But of course, at the social level, at the political and cultural level, that in the sea of disinformation and misinformation, alternative groups are there, they're working, and I believe the more and more groups will come up for the sake of establishing truth and continue to fight against disinformation. But eventually, information will remain and truth will prevail. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. For the next one, like Alfaro. So what do you think is what works, what solution works, what ecosystem interventions need to happen that proven to be most effective to strengthen information's integrity?
Me?
Alfaro.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Anas. I think the key word in making this work better is cooperation. I see a lot of investment, I see a lot of research, I see a lot of different actors working in trying to develop new solutions towards not just tackling this information, which I think it's important, but I always feel like it's just reactive and doesn't really addresses the root causes of where we are. So I feel like, again, we have to go back to two of the basics. One, the basics of how to strengthen democracy, and second, the basics of how to strengthen information systems. And again, there's a lot of people investing in these things, developing some really good solutions on these areas, but they don't even know what the other one is doing. I go to many panels, I go to many meetings in which people often discover in the table that they are doing the same kind of thing with the same kind of actors, investing with the same CSOs. And I feel that that is I'm going to say, a weakness in our current model of working on this. So I want to present some examples of where I think this cooperation approach is working. We as UNDP have something called the Global Coalition for Information Integrity. It it hosts most of the major players when it comes to electoral assistance on a global level, digital platforms, and most CSOs who are working on the digital rights sector. The initial idea with this was just literally to have a space in which we could just share the ideas and share the actions that we were taking in different countries. And we identified that there was a lot of duplicity. We identified that there was a lot of different things that were overlapping. And just by coordinating our action and making sure that our investment could address the same issue in a scalable manner, we started making higher impacts. We've actually been able to replicate this model, the global model, at a national level as well. So for example, we have now national action coalitions in Bolivia and Chile, Honduras, and each one of these spaces is addressing the same kind of actors at a national level, trying to create, I'm going to say, a more coherent experience and more coherent addressing of these issues. I'm going to leave it there for now, and maybe we can go back to how we're addressing AI afterwards.
Thank you, Alvaro. And go back to Andres, for example, what you have seen in the election world, from your experience, is there any alternative or strategies to prevent these informations from escalating during the elections?
Thank you very much, Anna. Well, in fact, as I mentioned in my previous intervention, elections is one of the areas that can be very vulnerable to misinformation, disinformation. When we talk about elections, we do not only talk about the election day. We started even from the voters' registration, all the voters' registration process, all the preparation of the elections, all they are vulnerable to misinformation, disinformation from those who want to, by any side or other side, to interrupt a process to move forward in a correct way. Going to your question, Anna, what happened is that the electoral management bodies and those institutions that are in charge of organizing the elections, they need to, first of all, start with a very transparent way of behaving. When I'm talking about very transparent way, I remember, and again, put it in a context, I have two different cases that I can compare. I had the opportunity to work in Timor-Leste, and I have the opportunity to work in Mozambique. In Timor-Leste, all the process, even the smallest process to start printing the ballot papers, to start testing the indelible ink, to start designing the ballot paper, all are conducted in public and with the presence of the observers, the media, and the party agents. That helps the process to be more transparent and building trust into the public and the voters. Let me go to the other case that I work in that and I saw. In this country, in Mozambique, last year there were elections, and they were following a totally different approach. The approach was all closed door. The decisions were taken closed door. The production, the decision for the contested ballots, they were done closed door. And that create a serious mistrusting of the public, mistrusting of the political parties, that something was cooking behind that. So these two examples show us how transparency within the electoral management bodies can help. Then, if there is coming a misinformation campaign, but if you are already having a very transparent and solid process, that helps to build strained political and electoral systems. The other way, the more secret the process is done, the less communications are coming out from the authorities, the most vulnerable are, and the more open to being attacked by misinformation and disinformation.
Thank you. And Min,
you want to add? If I may add, I think if I get the thrust of your question correctly, I think elections will be a very important test as far as credibility is concerned. How the people look at the government, how do people look at the election. And I think for any country, and you know in Singapore, we've had one government for so long, and there are questions raised about whether, in fact, there is real democracy. But I think if the media and if information is not used properly, I think it will discredit elections. Elections will lose its effectiveness as a tool of a measure of the kind of democracy you want in a country, the kind of openness you want in terms of political activity. So, but on top of that, I think we will also be a test whether, in fact, the media, the information industry will be able to attract enough of the young who feels there is a need for a balance in terms of information that's required as far as covering elections in particular. So it will be a real test how a country, a government addresses itself to these issues. It will determine the kind of how successful we can allow the information industry, the information media industry, and the information tools to play a role in terms of bringing in that greater cohesiveness and greater sense of oneness in a particular country or community or region.
Good, and that's a good leverage to the next questions to Min. Because what is the most effective governance strategies to regulate AI? Is it possible to regulate AI without basically overreach or doing more a censorship? Is it the regulations? Is it co-regulations? What's your opinion?
Yeah, that's a difficult question. And indeed, I don't think there is a one-size-fits-all, as it were. Obviously, it needs to be adapted to each country's specific context, and that context will also change from time to time within the same sort of country, right? But what we have seen, though, generally in the sphere of AI regulation, and this is something I said earlier on in my previous panel, is that there are broadly three types, let's say, of AI regulation that we see today, right? The first is, euphemistically called innovation first, I guess, or some might call it no regulation, but innovation first, let's say. The second is more of a safety first approach, more seen very much in countries like the EU with the EU AI Act and so on. And the third, I guess, is some mix of the two, but with a different flavor. It's more of a, let's say, control-based AI, shall we say. Not to use the word authoritarian, but I guess I've used it now. So three broad models, right? And within these three broad models, coming back to your question, we do see a mixture of hard laws, in other words, laws and regulations, soft law, things like guidelines, principles, being used to influence AI development. And indeed, there are other ways that governments are influencing the way AI is regulated per se. Another way is actually through investment in AI. So some of you may have heard the concept of sovereign AI, which is where governments invest in different parts of the AI value chain in order to, for a variety of reasons, partly national security, partly to localize the technology, partly for availability, and so, and partly for access as well, right? Access. And another way, which might not seem so intuitive, is that governments also shape the development of AI through using AI, right? So, there has been one good example of that, again, not pointing any fingers, so, read between the lines, is there has been a regulation, for example, that imposes ideological requirements for AI that's used in the public sector, right? So that is, interesting, shall we say? That certainly shapes the development of AI. That's, given the fact that the public sector is, a large user, well, I guess, an increasingly large user of AI, and obviously that then shapes the way that these sort of models are developed in the future. And indeed, there is no one-size-fits-all, right, as I mentioned before. So some countries use a mix of, soft laws without having regulations. Some countries use, repurpose existing regulations to fit within the AI space, whereas others enact very specific and dedicated AI laws. Here, looking at the EU as a regional entity, South Korea, Brazil, it's in the works. But what is important, though, I would add, and this is where I'll leave the conversation, is to actually build trust build trust in AI as a technology and build trust in governments in use of AI and regulation of AI. It's important to put the rights of individuals that are impacted by AI first in any regulation, right? So, how does one ensure that rights holders' right to privacy in relation to the way the training data, et cetera, is used? How does one ensure that AI does not discriminate against vulnerable or minority populations? So these sort of concepts are important to embed in any laws and regulations around the world, in our opinion. In other words, having a rights-based approach to AI governance. And I think that is indeed, that will also have a great impact on the misinformation, disinformation, or information integrity broadly that we're talking about today, because that obviously is intrinsically linked to the protection and respect of rights as well.
I think you touched the heart of the matter, the one word which you use, trust.
Yes.
Trust is basic, is key, and is the most important part. But it's easier said than done. To establish, to gain trust is a very complex issue, depending on the history, the culture of the country, the people, and it requires a lot more discussion. But trust is basic and is very critical to understanding what this issue is about.
And I think we are still in a fairly early development of AI. We still don't know what happened in the next weeks or months. So, Nurul, considering that resources and knowledge, our knowledge are very limited, the question is, what should we prioritize? Should we prioritize the capacity, newsroom capacity? Should we prioritize, as you said, about fact-checking? Or should we prioritize policy reforms? What should we prioritize in this current context?
Well, all of these factors are very important that we have already mentioned. But fact-checking remains the first thing, and that's the job of the professional journalist. And of course, for that to happen, if the media has a democratic responsibility to make the political and other actors, powerful actors, to comply with the aspirations of the people, the question of accountability comes. So it's not just providing the readers or audience with information. At the same time, it's important to make some, influencing the public opinion in favor of social and political justice. At the same time, trying to make all the institutions involved that affects the lives of the people in general to make accountable to the people. And of course, newsroom to editorial teams, to the reporters, they have to play their role professionally. That's important.
Okay, thank you.
To have the integrity of the information. The man behind the machine is very important. You have to have the journalists, men and women, who have the intellectual integrity first. And that remains I may sound little old school, but morality is important.
Okay, thank you. I would like also to give an opportunity for the floor to ask questions. The gentleman, that's 1, 2, and then the blue one. Yes. Please say your name and to whom the panel is.
Greetings. Myself, Ong Thwagyo Marma Ong. My first question is to Nurul Kabir sir. How spreading misinformation can stop without promulgating an act or policy, because we have experienced that if an act or policy can turn into draconian. For example, in Bangladesh perspective, DSA, which is present government now amended this act. And another question is is an illiteracy a big factor of spreading and misinformation? Anyone can answer. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's me?
Yes.
Should I respond now or?
Maybe let's just take that one.
My question is to Mr. Andres del Castillo about the disinformation coming from beyond the border. Like we saw after the ouster of the former regime, a variety of rumors started to spread, and the Indian media took it, to a next level, and it still hurts. It continues to spread. So that's one thing. How does the government tackle that in general? And before the election, the election is approaching. What might be the effect or influence on the overall environment on that? And to Mr. Mong, just one question. How do you see the preparedness of the developing countries in terms of AI governance? We see that developed countries already have took their steps, but where does Bangladesh and countries like ours stand at?
Okay, we take one more questions. Yes.
Hello. I have two questions. First one to Mr. Nurul Kubir. There should be mechanisms and several apparatuses to make clear distinction between information and disinformation, as you all have discussed very beautifully. But when it comes to disinformation, as Nurul Kubir mentioned while discussing the theory of human nature of David Hume, disinformation as socio-political basis of any discourse that attempts to dominate the mainstream political perception in society. How do we deal it? Obviously, state and other apparatuses can't just block any discourses. That might be a violation of some rights or norms. But in case of socio-political truth, how can we deal with it? What are the possible measures we can adopt? Are there any? Or we just have to accept silently that we live in so-called post-truth or non-truth era? And my second question is to the whole panel. How do you capture the relationship between conspiracy theories and disinformation? And how does this relationship affect any kind of political crisis? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Nurul, maybe you can answer those two questions that addressed to you specifically.
Thank you. Well, the first question that whether we need a legislation, of course, to prevent disinformation and misinformation, any state or any country for that, when I won't say state, the country should have a piece of legislation. But the problem that we have empirically seen over the last few decades here in Bangladesh, that some of you who are from Dhaka or Bangladeshis, and you know that there had been a law proposed by the previous regime, the Right to Information law, which is directly related to the freedom of speech issue. The preamble of the law said, and they propagated that they are doing it to protect the right to information of the people and the press. But practically, when we scrutinize the law, that the law was made, in fact, to prevent information, free flow of information. This is how the legislations are made by the state. So when a standard law is important, it is also important to make sure that in the legislation process, that the people, the politically conscious sections of the people are aware what kind of a law is being imposed to prevent free flow of information, but in the name of giving the right to information. That's important. So vigilance is very important, intellectual and political vigilance on the legislation process and the content of the legislation itself. On the other hand, the second question that a young friend has asked, that are the socio-political. Of course, I agree that disinformation and misinformation has to be clearly defined. So these are two different things. As I said, the misinformation can be interpreted as an innocent mistake, but well, for the press, for the mainstream press, if making innocent mistakes becomes the habit, that's a dangerous thing to address. And at the social political level, of course, most disinformation are campaigned by the ruling classes, those who govern, those who had governed or want to govern. This disinformation, state-sponsored, political party-sponsored, and is elite-sponsored. So this is right on the one hand. On the other hand, another section of the elite committed to truth and having some sense of integrity, they also fight it. Of course, so this needs to be fought both at the intellectual level, at the social level, at the political level, at every level. This needs to be fought against, and for that to happen, of course, it's a coalition between them who are seeking truth, who understand the importance of truth for the development of a society and state, democratizing the state. So there should be different kinds of coalition developed so that they can work together. Thank you.
Thank you. And maybe Andres and also Mr. Nurul, Andres and also can answer about these informations across borders, the questions to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's a very good question. In fact, it's something that we are all seeing in elections, and it's not a secret. We have seen even in the American elections how the Russian hackers came there. We have seen in many, many cases. So that is something that is confirmed, exists. That's not misinformation, it's not a rumor, exists. There are campaigns that are orchestrated with different interests from other countries in order to destabilize the elections of one country, particular country. Particularly regarding that, for example, in UNDP, and then let me point out our colleague here, Alvaro, UNDP has been developed tools, different tools, in order to identify in real time this type of misinformation, disinformation, posts that are coming and are becoming viral in social media. Through these tools, it's a tool that are powered by artificial intelligence, and they can, in real time, they can monitor thousands of posts that are public in social media, in Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, etc., and can identify later by a team of monitors, can identify which are fake news, which are misinformation, disinformation, etc. Based into that, they can be reaction from the authorities. This is a reactive approach. When something is identified that is coming as a misinformation, disinformation, and can affect, but there's also the preventing way, and the preventing way can also be done through, first of all, campaigns to all the citizens, to all the voters, verifying before sharing. Many people just see the news and share, and share, and share. Verifying, try to have a strong civic and voter education campaign, telling the youth, before you share, verify. That is something that needs to be done. That's in our own responsibility. So there are different ways to do it, to try to fight this information. Not only that one that comes from abroad, but that comes internally.
Thank you. And Min, I think you also have an expertise to answer about the governance of the platforms.
Sure. So I guess the question that was asked was how prepared are developing countries in terms of AI governance, right? And the quick answer to that is it's evolving. So there are different levels of preparedness, and it's understandable because the technology continues to develop at a rapid pace. The impacts of the technology as well, therefore, develop at a rapid pace, and regulation even in developed countries, let alone developing countries, is constantly evolving. So yeah, so we see a lot of countries in the developing, well, I guess the global south, to use a more correct term, taking a wait and see kind of approach generally to regulations. We see, for example, in India, for example, where there is consideration for a long-term sort of dedicated AI governance framework, but for the time being, existing laws are being repurposed to cover AI as well. What we also see is that when AI governance does kind of take place within these jurisdictions, there is a general alignment in some way, shape, or form to some combination of the three models that I mentioned earlier. So the three models being sort of an innovation-first model, a safety-first model, and I guess a control-first kind of model, right? So we see a mixture of those approaches being used. Maybe depending on which part of the global south you're in, the control-first approach seems to be relatively more attractive, especially in my part of the world particularly. But what's important fundamentally in the longer term is that, as I mentioned earlier, a rights-based approach is fundamental to any AI regulation, whether it's in the global north or in the global south. That is essentially what allows AI innovation to continue unfettered going forward, because it is only when the rights of rights holders are respected that trust in AI will grow, and therefore the rights-respecting usage of AI will also grow. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to take two more questions.
Thank you. The August gathering here. I am very thrilled, of course, to see the dais and all the covered speakers, especially Dr. Zainul Abidin Rashid, whom I've known for many, many years, my Harvard days with him. My question is to you, actually, and also the panel can also take up. Your first meeting with Colonel Gaddafi with no device, quote, a smart device, I call it, was intriguing to me. The fact that how the world has changed. Last night I was watching Donald Trump with Saudi Prince and also with the New York, the new mayor. I've seen how they orchestrated over the years. And when I look back, one of the story I was reading about Daniel Goleman, he was a Harvard very famous psychologist. He wrote the book, Emotional Intelligence. The book he has written was bestseller book in the world. And based on that view, I asked you the question, how much of politics in the Bay of Bengal reaches citizens through devices, platforms, and often disinformation? If this becomes a normal instrument of governance, how do leaders in our region expect to maintain legitimacy with a young generation that lives on open platforms and does its own fact-checking in the real-time basis? And if you had to choose one institutional reform to avoid a permanent breakdown of trust, becomes between citizen and the state, what it would be? And it's a horse of dilemma, and I must call it to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And the second one is the lady on the back.
Yes, hi. My name is Karina Chimoy. I'm a journalist for DW. I can't see you, so I'm just moving to the right. It's a very basic question, because I was wondering, one of the root causes why there is disinformation and misinformation, it is probably also because people don't verify, but isn't it also education, like the basic education system? Do you also have projects, do you cooperate with the education sector? And how do you see it? Do you think our system has failed and hasn't invested enough in education systems, and that this is also one of the reasons why we're seeing so much disinformation, misinformation, and people who believe in that and don't question it?
Okay, thank you. So maybe Alvaro, you can answer the last questions.
Sure. There was one lady who is waiting for long.
Okay, so
if we still have time, we will do a third round.
Cool. So starting with the last question around, the intersections between education and vulnerability to disinformation, there's definitely a connection. But I'll say that beyond just that connection, it's not just basic education. It is lifelong education. It is not just about what we teach kids in school. It is also about the way that public officers keep on learning at their jobs how to deal with these issues. It is also about how people across all ages understand their roles, their new and adjusted roles in this new information ecosystem. And I think across UNDP, but also the broader international cooperation, there's a couple of projects that focus on different parts of this ecosystem and strengthening those capacities so they can deal better with this. Andres was mentioning this idea of Immoito Plus, which is one of our platforms to strengthen data on these issues. Sometimes when we don't have specific data that teaches us or leads us towards what actually is happening, it is much easier to fall into just initial ideas or superficial sentiments on what's happening. But again, shifting the narrative with data and evidence definitely makes a huge difference. So again, Immuito Plus is creating that kind of shift in the system.
Yeah. Just very briefly about the education system and how it combats misinformation, or how effective it is at combating misinformation, right? So I think education should not be interpreted as, you know, in the traditional sense, right? I mean, we, as GNI, we published very recently approaches for governments, for civil society, and for companies to respond to government interventions to AI in a rights-respecting manner. So have a look at our website for that. But the key point I wanted to make around education particularly is that education can take place on the very platforms where the users are using as well, right? So whether it is sort of, you know, digital literacy training, whether it is, you know, notes to help users to kind of challenge what they're reading, that kind of education as well is important because it happens, you know, as and when the users are using the platforms where this misinformation and disinformation is occurring, and indeed it's relevant for those that have left the education sector already, as also to people like me and the rest of this panel, I guess. So yeah, just wanted to point that out.
Okay. And the last questions to you, Mr.
Yes,
Nurul.
thank you. I'd like to thank Mr. Mainuddin Munim for that question. I've known him as a businessman. I never expect him to ask a very deep academic intellectual question like that. Your Harvard colors are showing. Well, I think it just points to the fact that in terms of history, whether it's the Gaddafi time, whether it's MBS in terms of leadership, whether Hamdani, I think people are waiting to see what will they come with in terms of ideas that can bring about that better trust. It's not a given. Trust is not a given, it has to be earned. And it will have to be partly because of the personality, the individual's background, standing, and what they come with. Because I think the expectations are different. Before, loyalty plays a very important part. But now, principles. The young will demand principles to see whether, in fact, the ideas, the efforts taken deserve the support. So it's back to the question of whether there's enough transparency with resilience, not only transparency, but it can last the challenges of that transparency, and that can bring about the trust that we want. And the final word is balance. The balance between the two, between the transparency, resilience required, and the trust that has to be built and gained. You need to find that kind balance to bring that about. Thank you.
Thank you. That's
just a minute to take a few words about the last question of the integration of education to fight disinformation. I think there's a very strong point in it. There are other ways that we have discussed, and many of you know much better, particularly the younger ones. But there's an old school thing one thought once again, but I would agree that education and morality is very important in terms of fighting disinformation and the preparing people's thought process. That lying is bad. Lying has something to do with the lack of integrity of a human being. So this is an important concept that the younger generation, through the education system, would be motivated. Well, I mean, it's not only the younger generation. I mean, if you integrate the education system from now, this issue, of course, side by side with other mechanisms, other political actions, other social responsibilities performed by different sections of people, that would have a positive impact in the days to come. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for such a rich discussions. If I can take one idea from these sessions is actually disinformation thrives where trust is weak. A lot of people mentions about trust, but trust is slow to build, but also fast to lose. So it's also very important how we can maintain, like coordinations across institutions, how we can ensure about the openness. I think Andres and Mintuong mentions about accountability and share responsibility. So I think there's a lot of homework that need to be done by different actors. It's not only one actors, it's a multi-stakeholders to make sure that openness, timeliness, communications, and fairness are being there to make sure there's an information integrity with the rights perspective. Okay, thank you all the panelists, and thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anna.
Now I will request all the speakers to come forward for the group picture.